Some things are not discovered. They are remembered by the system before the mind is ready to understand them. The first signal came at 4:17 a.m., when the remote monitoring grid detected a stability anomaly at the edge of Ethan Caldwell's operational territory. Not a breach. Not a failure. A deviation that behaved like structure pretending to be noise. Ethan stood alone in the central command room of the estate, eyes fixed on the data stream cascading across the glass interface. Every metric was within expected range except one, emotional feedback variance, which should not have existed in a system designed for isolation-based control. He did not react immediately. Reaction implied interpretation, and interpretation implied uncertainty. Instead, he expanded the dataset, reran the environmental scan, and isolated the location source. The result did not change. The anomaly originated from the outer forest sector, near a civilian structure registered as inactive in official records. A cottage. That word should have meant nothing. But it did. Because the system flagged it twice. Once as a location. Once as a repeat source of irregular stabilization events that had no classification under current operational models. Ethan exhaled slowly, his gaze narrowing as he stepped away from the interface. Correlate all external variables within a 5-mile radius, he ordered quietly. The system complied instantly, projecting environmental overlays into structured layers of probability mapping. And there she was. Lily Harper. Registered civilian. No formal affiliation. No recorded system access. No behavioral risk classification. She appeared in the data as absence of threat. Yet every metric surrounding her position contradicted that classification. Energy fluctuation stabilized when her activity increased. Environmental volatility decreased within proximity thresholds that had no logical explanation. Ethan studied the projection longer than necessary. That was the first mistake. Not the observation itself, but the duration of it. Because systems like his were not designed to linger on anomalies. They were designed to eliminate them. He turned off the projection and initiated a direct field verification protocol. Within minutes, he was outside the main estate perimeter, moving through controlled terrain that gradually transitioned into unmanaged forest land. The air changed first. Not physically. Statistically. The environmental readings became less predictable, less obedient. As if the system itself was losing confidence in its own structure. And then he saw it. A small cottage at the edge of the clearing, partially obscured by overgrowth, existing with an unsettling simplicity that did not match any regional design logic. No security perimeter. No surveillance signature. No defensive architecture. Only presence. Ethan stopped at a measured distance, scanning the structure before shifting his attention to the movement near the entrance. A woman. Lily Harper. She was carrying water from a shallow well, her movements untrained but deliberate in a way that did not conform to any operational inefficiency classification. She was not aware of being observed. Or perhaps she was. That uncertainty itself was new. And then came the second anomaly. A low sound from behind the cottage. Ethan adjusted his position slightly, eyes narrowing as a massive black wolf emerged from the tree-line. Its body carried visible signs of prior injury, yet its movement was not chaotic. It was controlled. Purposeful. And most disturbing of all, it did not react to him. It reacted to her. Lily turned at the sound without fear. No hesitation. No defensive posture. She simply set the water down and approached slowly, as if the creature belonged to a system she understood instinctively but had never been taught. Ethan remained still. Observing. Recording. The wolf lowered its head when she reached it. Not submission. Recognition. That distinction mattered. And Ethan Caldwell, who had spent his entire life building systems that eliminated unpredictability, felt something he could not immediately classify register beneath the surface of his control framework. The cottage was not the anomaly. The woman was not the anomaly. The wolf was not the anomaly. The anomaly was the way everything became stable the moment she stopped treating chaos as something to resist. The system did not recognize the moment as significant at first. Ethan Caldwell had seen thousands of environmental anomalies, all of them ultimately traceable to structural error, sensor drift, or incomplete data mapping. But this one refused categorization not because it was complex, but because it was simple in a way that contradicted every rule he had built. He remained at the edge of the clearing, maintaining observational distance while the cottage continued to behave like a closed system that did not acknowledge external control inputs. Inside that system, Lily Harper continued her quiet interaction with the black wolf, and the pattern of stabilization repeated again. No fluctuation spikes. No behavioral instability. No reactive aggression from the animal. Only calm continuity, as if her presence acted as a constant balancing force that required no execution logic. Ethan adjusted his position slightly, refining his viewing angle. The wolf shifted subtly in response, not toward him, but toward her, confirming once again that its behavioral anchoring point was singular. That should have been irrelevant to system architecture. It was not. It was central. Lily reached for a container of water near the cottage entrance and set it down slowly. The wolf followed the motion without urgency, as if predicting outcome rather than reacting to it. Ethan recorded the sequence internally without initiating a formal scan. He was no longer trusting automated classification. Every prior model had already failed to account for consistency at this level. A breeze moved through the clearing again, and environmental sensors along the perimeter registered minor fluctuations. Yet within the cottage radius, stability remained unchanged. Ethan narrowed his gaze. The contradiction was becoming persistent rather than incidental. He took one step forward, then another, crossing deeper into proximity range than protocol typically allowed for unclassified civilian interaction zones. Still, nothing changed in the cottage response field. Lily did not turn immediately, but the wolf did. Not in threat posture. In recognition. That detail registered more sharply than anything else. Recognition without hostility implied familiarity, and familiarity implied repeated exposure or innate alignment. Neither explanation fit the data he had. Lily finally turned her head slightly, as if acknowledging his presence had always been part of the environment rather than an interruption to it. Her expression did not shift. No alarm. No question. No compliance response. Only awareness. Ethan stopped walking. The distance between them now fell within standard engagement range, yet the interaction rules did not activate. No defensive response from the wolf. No emotional escalation from the human subject. Instead, something far more unusual occurred. Stability increased again. Not gradually. Not randomly. Immediately. Ethan's internal system flagged the change as impossible. Environmental coherence should degrade with unknown human variables entering proximity. Instead, it improved. He remained still, analyzing the wolf once more. Its breathing pattern had normalized further, injuries no longer fluctuating in severity markers, as if biological stress itself was being suppressed by proximity to Lily. Ethan finally spoke, voice controlled and low. This effect is not consistent with any known biological stabilization model. Lily looked at him briefly, then returned her attention to the wolf as she answered. It is not a model, she said simply. That answer should have meant nothing. It should have been dismissed. Instead, it created a break in his internal categorization loop. Because models could be corrected. Systems could be recalibrated. But something that refused classification entirely could not be corrected through logic alone. Ethan took a slow step back, not retreating, but testing boundary response. The system did not destabilize. It remained stable. Which meant his presence was no longer required for measurement. Lily continued her interaction with the wolf, and the cottage environment held its equilibrium as if her behavior was the only variable that mattered. Ethan realized, with increasing clarity, that he was no longer observing an anomaly. He was observing a functioning system that existed without him. The system did not recalibrate its classification model because there was no longer a valid reference category to apply. Ethan Caldwell remained at a controlled distance from the cottage, yet the concept of distance itself had begun to lose operational meaning. Every metric he relied on continued to report stability within the cottage boundary, even though no standard architecture supported the existence of a self-stabilizing human-environment interaction field. Lily Harper continued her interaction with the black wolf as if no external observation layer existed at all. That detail should have been impossible. All monitored subjects, even civilian-class entities, typically exhibited microvariance when observed. She did not. The absence of variance became its own form of deviation. Ethan narrowed his gaze slightly, shifting his focus from the wolf to her hands, tracking motion patterns instead of emotional inference. The wolf remained still while she adjusted its position, and its physiological reading stabilized further in response. No medication had been administered. No system intervention had occurred. Yet biological recovery indicators continued to improve at a rate inconsistent with passive healing models. Ethan took a step forward, this time not to test proximity thresholds, but to test whether presence itself would trigger system recalibration. Nothing changed. The environment did not respond to him. For the first time, he registered that he was not part of the active system loop occurring inside the cottage boundary. He was external. Observational only. Lily finally stood fully upright, placing the last container aside. Her movement was unhurried, as if concluding a process that did not require confirmation. The wolf shifted slightly, not away from her, but closer to her position, reinforcing the directional dependency pattern that had repeated since Ethan's arrival. Ethan observed the behavior again, comparing it against every known model of animal attachment, environmental conditioning, and trauma response. None matched the consistency displayed here. "You are not treating it," Ethan said finally, voice steady. Lily paused briefly, then replied without looking at him directly. "It does not need treatment," she said. That statement should have been invalid. Yet the wolf's condition continued to improve even without intervention, suggesting that the correction mechanism was not external but relational. Ethan stepped closer again, this time crossing into what would normally be classified as direct engagement range. Still, no reaction triggered from the wolf. No defensive posture. No aggression. Only recalibrated calm. Lily's attention returned briefly to him, not with caution, but with acknowledgement, as if his presence was simply another environmental factor she had already accounted for. "It responds to you as well," Ethan said quietly, testing the hypothesis. Lily tilted her head slightly. "It responds to what you expect from it," she said. Ethan paused. That answer disrupted the assumption that the system was reactive. It implied projection. Not biological response, but interpretive feedback. He shifted his stance slightly, observing the wolf again. Its posture did not change under his gaze, but its alignment with Lily remained absolute. Ethan realized that every model he had applied to this situation assumed control originated from authority. Yet nothing here responded to authority. It responded to consistency. Lily moved again, sitting near the cottage threshold, and the wolf followed immediately, settling beside her without hesitation. The simplicity of the motion carried more structural weight than any recorded system behavior Ethan had ever analyzed. He stood still, recalculating not the data, but the framework itself. Because if stability could exist without control, and if coherence could be maintained without command structure, then the system he had built his entire understanding upon was not incomplete. It was irrelevant. And for the first time, Ethan Caldwell did not attempt to correct the model. He simply continued observing what functioned without him. The system did not initiate a correction protocol because no deviation threshold had been officially breached, yet Ethan Caldwell no longer relied on threshold logic as a reliable measure of environmental truth. He remained positioned at the boundary of the cottage field. Observing without engagement, no longer attempting to impose structured classification onto a system that consistently operated outside his original control architecture. Inside the cottage perimeter, Lily Harper and the Black Wolf continued their interaction with the same steady continuity observed across all prior cycles. There was no variation in behavior, no escalation in emotional intensity, and no disruption in environmental stability. Ethan recorded the absence of change with increasing attention, because absence itself had become the most consistent signal. The wolf remained close to Lily, its posture relaxed and fully aligned with her minimal movements. It no longer reacted to environmental shifts or external presence cues. Instead, its behavior remained anchored exclusively to her position, as if she functioned as the sole reference point for its internal equilibrium. Ethan narrowed his gaze slightly, analyzing not the interaction itself, but the persistence of its stability under all observed conditions. No system input should have produced such sustained equilibrium without feedback correction or external reinforcement cycles. Yet the pattern remained unchanged. Lily shifted slightly, adjusting her position near the cottage threshold, and the wolf mirrored the movement with immediate, uncalculated precision. Ethan stepped forward once more, entering full observational range without triggering any system response. The environment remained unchanged. No recalibration signals activated. No instability markers emerged. The system no longer recognized his presence as a variable requiring adjustment. That realization registered without emotional framing. It was structural, not psychological. You are still analyzing it as if there is an external mechanism enforcing stability, Lily said calmly, without turning fully toward him. Ethan paused briefly before responding. All stable systems require regulatory input, he said. Lily shook her head faintly. Not all systems are designed that way, she replied. Ethan did not respond immediately. That distinction was not theoretical. It was foundational. If stability could exist without regulatory input, then the assumption that control required enforcement was incorrect. The wolf shifted again, maintaining its position beside Lily with complete consistency. Its behavior no longer reflected reactive conditioning. It reflected alignment without instruction. Ethan observed this carefully, noting the absence of any feedback loop between environment and behavior. There was no correction cycle. No reinforcement signal. No observable governance structure. Yet equilibrium persisted. Lily finally leaned back slightly against the cottage frame, her attention divided between stillness and awareness. She did not acknowledge Ethan directly, but she did not ignore him either. His presence existed within her awareness without altering her behavior in any measurable way. That neutrality itself became significant. Ethan took a slow step closer, entering full proximity range. Still, no system activation occurred. No environmental instability. No recalibration feedback. Only sustained equilibrium. The system is operating without external control input, Ethan said quietly, more to confirm internal analysis than to initiate dialogue. Lily responded without hesitation. It was never dependent on external control, she said. Ethan's gaze tightened slightly, not in resistance, but in recalibration. That statement contradicted every foundational assumption he had used to define system architecture across controlled environments. If stability was not dependent on control input, then control had never been the governing factor. It had only been observation layered over an already self-regulating structure. The wolf exhaled slowly, lowering its head near Lily's knee, maintaining full relaxation without prompting or instruction. Ethan shifted his stance slightly, adjusting his position for clearer observation, not intervention. The cottage remained unchanged. No escalation. No instability. No deviation. Only continuous equilibrium maintained without him. And for the first time, Ethan Caldwell recognized that he was not observing a system responding to his presence. He was observing a system that had never required his presence to function at all. The system did not generate a corrective response because there was no longer any defined deviation threshold that applied to Ethan Caldwell's position within the observational field. He remained at the boundary of the cottage environment, standing still in a state that no longer functioned as engagement, only acknowledgement. Inside the perimeter, Lily Harper and the Black Wolf continued their established pattern of interaction without disruption, as if the entire concept of external observation had been rendered irrelevant to internal stability. Ethan did not move immediately. Movement implied participation, and participation implied influence. Neither condition was supported by the data he was now observing. The wolf remained close to Lily, maintaining a calm, sustained equilibrium that did not fluctuate under environmental variation or external presence. Its behavior was no longer reactive. It was consistent in a way that did not require correction or reinforcement. Ethan narrowed his gaze slightly, shifting focus from interaction to structure. There was no visible control mechanism. No hierarchy of influence. No measurable input-output cycle that could explain the sustained stability of the system within the cottage boundary. Yet stability persisted regardless. Lily adjusted her position slightly, leaning closer to the cottage frame, and the wolf responded by mirroring the shift without delay or hesitation. The movement was not learned. It was immediate, as if the response existed prior to the action itself. Ethan stepped forward once more, entering full observational range without initiating system engagement protocols. The environment did not respond. No recalibration indicators activated. No instability readings increased. The system no longer registered his presence as a variable requiring adjustment. That absence of response carried more significance than any active anomaly signal. "You are still trying to find the control layer," Lily said quietly, without turning fully toward him. Ethan paused briefly before responding. "Control is the defining structure of all stable systems," he said. Lily shook her head faintly. "Only in systems that need control to remain stable," she replied. Ethan did not answer immediately. That distinction was not procedural. It was foundational. If stability existed without control input, then control was not a prerequisite condition for system coherence. It was only a compensatory mechanism used when coherence failed to sustain itself naturally. The wolf exhaled slowly, lowering its head near Lily's knee, maintaining full relaxation without external prompting. Ethan observed the motion carefully, focusing not on behavior but on causation structure. There was no command sequence. No reinforcement loop. No observable authority gradient. Yet equilibrium remained absolute. Lily finally shifted her attention slightly toward him, not in acknowledgement of presence, but in acknowledgement of his continued analysis. "It does not require you to understand it," she said. Ethan's gaze tightened slightly. "Understanding is required for replication," he replied. Lily nodded faintly. "Then you are still trying to replicate control," she said. Ethan did not respond. The accuracy of the statement could not be dismissed through structural analysis. It required reframing. He took a slow step closer, entering full proximity range. The system remained unchanged. No instability. No recalibration feedback. No rejection of external presence. Only continuity. Ethan stopped, maintaining stillness within a system that no longer differentiated between observer and non-observer states. "If stability persists without external regulation," Ethan said quietly, "then the system is self-sustaining at a level independent of operational control architecture." Lily leaned back slightly against the cottage frame. "It was never dependent on architecture," she said. Ethan's expression remained controlled, but internal recalibration continued without interruption. Every assumption he had built regarding system design, control dependency, and behavioral regulation was collapsing into a single unresolved conclusion. The structure he had spent his entire life refining was not the source of stability he was observing. The wolf shifted slightly again, maintaining perfect alignment with Lily's position without hesitation or recalculation. Ethan studied the pattern for several seconds longer than necessary. There was no deviation. No correction. No external enforcement. Only consistency. And for the first time, Ethan Caldwell understood that he was not analyzing a system under observation. He was observing a system that had never required analysis to function. The system did not initiate any corrective response because there was no longer a defined deviation state to respond to. Ethan Caldwell remained within the observational boundary of the cottage environment, but even the concept of boundary had begun to lose functional meaning under continued analysis. He stood still, not as an act of decision, but as a result of diminishing operational necessity. Inside the cottage perimeter, Lily Harper and the Black Wolf maintained the same uninterrupted state of alignment observed across all prior cycles. No behavioral drift. No instability signals. No deviation from established interaction patterns. Ethan observed without initiating any internal classification update. The system no longer returned meaningful categorization outputs for the observed phenomena, and continued attempts produced only structural recursion without resolution. Lily shifted slightly, resting one hand near the wolf's shoulder, and the animal responded with immediate, unmeasured synchronization. The movement was neither learned nor instructed. It existed as continuity rather than reaction. Ethan narrowed his gaze, focusing not on behavior but on causation hierarchy. There was no observable hierarchy. No command structure. No feedback enforcement loop. Yet equilibrium persisted without interruption. Ethan took a slow step forward, crossing deeper into proximity range without triggering any system recalibration protocols. The absence of response was now consistent across all observed conditions. The system did not recognize his presence as a variable requiring adjustment. That absence was no longer interpreted as error. It was now the dominant signal. Lily did not turn immediately. Her attention remained divided between stillness and the wolf's steady presence. When she finally spoke, her voice remained calm and without emphasis. "You are still trying to place it inside your structure," she said. Ethan paused briefly before responding. "Structure is required for functional interpretation," he said. Lily shook her head faintly. "Only when you assume everything must be interpreted," she replied. Ethan did not answer immediately. That statement did not conflict with data. It invalidated the necessity of the data framework itself. The wolf exhaled slowly, maintaining full relaxation against Lily's position. Its condition remained stable beyond expected biological recovery parameters, yet no intervention had occurred. Ethan observed this carefully, focusing on causation absence rather than causation presence. There was no input mechanism. No regulatory feedback. No measurable authority gradient directing behavior. Yet the outcome remained consistent across all observed cycles. Lily shifted slightly, adjusting her posture near the cottage threshold, and the wolf mirrored the movement without delay. Ethan observed the synchronization pattern again, noting the absence of latency variance. "There is no control layer," Ethan said quietly, more to confirm internal recalibration than to initiate dialogue. Lily responded without looking at him directly. "There never was," she said. Ethan's internal system attempted one final structural reconciliation, but returned no usable model output. Every prior assumption regarding system dependency, control architecture, and behavioral regulation collapsed into a singular unresolved condition: stability without governance. He stepped slightly closer again, now fully within the interaction field. The system remained unchanged. No instability. No recalibration. No resistance response. Only continuity. Ethan stopped, maintaining stillness within a system that no longer differentiated observer from non-participant. Lily remained seated, and the wolf remained aligned beside her, both functioning within a stable loop that required no external validation. Ethan finally spoke, voice lower than before. "If there is no control mechanism," he said, "then what defines stability?" Lily paused briefly, then answered with calm certainty. "What does not fall apart when you stop trying to hold it together?" Ethan did not respond. The statement bypassed structural interpretation entirely. The cottage remained unchanged, but the implication was no longer local. It extended into every assumption he had built regarding system design. The wolf shifted once more, remaining fully at rest, and Lily's presence continued to anchor its equilibrium without observable effort. Ethan Caldwell stood within the field of a system that did not acknowledge his authority, his analysis, or his framework. And for the first time, he understood that stability was not something maintained through control. It was something that existed only where control was unnecessary. The system did not attempt recalibration because recalibration implied the existence of a governing structure. and Ethan Caldwell had already reached the point where no governing structure could be reliably identified within the cottage field. He remained within full observational range, but observation itself had lost its original function as a tool of interpretation. It now served only as confirmation that the system he once controlled did not recognize him as an active participant. Inside the cottage perimeter, Lily Harper and the Black Wolf maintained uninterrupted stability, continuing the same behavioral alignment observed across all previous cycles without deviation, escalation, or decay. Ethan did not initiate any new system queries. Every attempt to classify the observed phenomenon had already returned incomplete or non-applicable results. Lily shifted slightly near the threshold, and the wolf adjusted its position in immediate response, maintaining perfect synchronization without hesitation or correction. Ethan narrowed his gaze, focusing on the structural absence of any measurable control input. There was no command layer. No feedback loop. No hierarchical enforcement. Yet the outcome remained unchanged across time intervals. That contradiction had become the only consistent data point. Ethan took a slow step forward, entering full proximity range once again. The system remained silent. No recalibration. No instability markers. No resistance response. The absence of reaction was no longer interpreted as anomaly. It was now baseline behavior. Lily did not turn immediately. Her attention remained partially on the wolf, which remained fully relaxed, its posture unchanged even under Ethan's closer presence. When she finally spoke, her voice remained calm and without emphasis. "You are still expecting structure to explain it," she said. Ethan paused briefly before responding. "Without structure, interpretation becomes non-functional," he said. Lily shook her head faintly. "Then maybe interpretation is not required for everything to function," she replied. Ethan did not answer immediately. That statement did not produce conflict within his system. It produced absence of necessity. The wolf exhaled slowly, lowering its head again near Lily's knee, maintaining full equilibrium without external input. Ethan observed carefully, noting the persistence of stability across multiple observation cycles. There was no deviation pattern. No corrective mechanism. No observable governance structure. Yet equilibrium remained absolute. Lily adjusted her position slightly, and the wolf mirrored the movement with immediate, uncalculated alignment. Ethan focused on the pattern again, this time removing all prior assumptions about control architecture. What remained was a system that did not require enforcement to remain stable. He stepped slightly closer, now fully within the interaction field, and still nothing changed. No system response. No recalibration. No resistance. Only continuity. Ethan finally spoke, voice quieter than before. "If stability exists without control," he said, "then control was never the source." Lily responded after a brief pause. "It was never the source," she said simply. Ethan's internal framework attempted one final reconciliation, but no structural model could be generated from the available data. Every assumption regarding system dependency, behavioral regulation, and environmental control collapsed into a single unresolved condition: stability as an independent state rather than an engineered outcome. The cottage remained unchanged. The wolf remained calm. Lily remained steady. And Ethan Caldwell, for the first time since constructing his understanding of systems, recognized that he was not witnessing something malfunctioning. He was witnessing something complete without him. The system did not initiate recalibration because recalibration presumes a governing structure capable of adjusting outputs, and Ethan Caldwell had already reached the operational conclusion that no such structure was currently governing the observed field. He remained within full proximity range of the cottage environment, yet proximity no longer functioned as a meaningful variable for influence or observation. Inside the cottage perimeter, Lily Harper and the Black Wolf continued their established pattern of interaction without deviation, escalation, or measurable instability across all observed cycles. Ethan did not initiate new system queries, as prior classification attempts had already exhausted all valid interpretive categories. Lily stood near the cottage threshold, her posture unchanged, while the wolf remained close to her position, maintaining the same precise alignment that had been consistent since initial observation. Ethan narrowed his gaze slightly, focusing on the absence of any control signal within the interaction structure. There was no command input. No environmental correction loop. No hierarchical enforcement mechanism. Yet the behavioral equilibrium remained uninterrupted across time intervals that should have produced measurable drift. Ethan took a slow step forward, entering full engagement range once again. The system did not respond. No recalibration triggers activated. No instability readings increased. No structural correction was initiated. The absence of response was now persistent enough to be considered baseline rather than anomaly. Lily did not turn immediately. Her attention remained partially on the wolf, which continued to display full relaxation and sustained alignment with her presence. When she finally spoke, her voice remained calm and unchanging in tone. "You are still trying to define it through absence of control," she said. Ethan paused briefly before responding. "Without defined control parameters, system prediction becomes invalid," he said. Lily shook her head faintly. "Then maybe you are trying to predict something that was never meant to be controlled," she replied. Ethan did not answer immediately. That statement did not generate system conflict. It generated structural absence. The wolf exhaled slowly, lowering its head against Lily's knee, maintaining complete equilibrium without external reinforcement. Ethan observed carefully, focusing on causation architecture rather than behavioral output. There was no observable feedback loop. No reinforcement cycle. No correction mechanism. Yet stability persisted across all observed states. Lily shifted slightly, and the wolf mirrored the movement instantly, maintaining perfect synchronization without hesitation or delay. Ethan adjusted his stance, entering deeper into the interaction field. Still, the system remained unchanged. No resistance. No recalibration. Only continuity. "If there is no control mechanism," Ethan said quietly, "then stability must originate elsewhere." Lily responded after a brief pause. "It does not originate," she said. Ethan's gaze tightened slightly, not in resistance, but in recalibration of internal framework. That response removed origin as a required variable. If stability did not originate, then it did not require causation in the way his system defined it. The wolf remained still, fully aligned with Lily's position, exhibiting no deviation from its established behavioral state. Ethan studied the pattern again, removing all prior assumptions regarding system dependency and regulatory structure. What remained was a continuous state of equilibrium that did not require enforcement, correction, or input validation. He took one final step forward, now fully integrated into the observational field, and still nothing changed. The system did not recognize him as a required variable. No instability occurred. No recalibration followed. Only persistence of structure without governance. Ethan finally spoke, voice lower than before. "Then this system is not being maintained," he said. Lily looked toward him briefly, her expression unchanged. "It never needed maintenance," she said simply. Ethan's internal framework attempted a final structural reconciliation, but no valid model could be produced from the observed data. Every foundational assumption regarding control architecture, system regulation, and behavioral enforcement collapsed into a single unresolved condition: stability existing independent of control. The cottage remained unchanged. The wolf remained calm. Lily remained steady. And Ethan Caldwell, standing within a system that functioned perfectly without his involvement, recognized that he was no longer observing a deviation from his world. He was observing a world that had never required his system at all. The system did not initiate recalibration because recalibration presumes the existence of a governing control layer, and Ethan Caldwell had already reached the conclusion that no governing layer existed within the observed cottage environment. He remained fully within the interaction field, yet his presence no longer functioned as a variable within the system architecture. Inside the cottage perimeter, Lily Harper and the black wolf maintained uninterrupted equilibrium across all observed cycles, exhibiting no deviation, no instability, and no measurable change in behavioral continuity. Ethan did not initiate further system queries, as prior analysis cycles had already exhausted all available classification frameworks. Lily remained near the cottage threshold, her posture unchanged, while the wolf maintained precise alignment with her position, responding only to her movement without delay or variance. Ethan narrowed his gaze slightly, focusing on the absence of any definable control structure. There was no command input. No correction feedback loop. No hierarchical enforcement system. Yet the behavioral state remained fully stable across all observational intervals. Ethan took a slow step forward, entering full proximity range once again. The system did not respond. No recalibration signals activated. No instability markers were generated. No structural resistance occurred. The absence of response had now become persistent enough to be classified as baseline operational condition rather than anomaly. Lily finally turned her attention slightly toward him, her expression remaining neutral and unaltered. "You are still trying to force structure onto something that does not require it," she said calmly. Ethan paused briefly before responding. "Without structural parameters, prediction and replication become non-functional," he said. Lily shook her head faintly. "Then maybe what you call non-functional is just unnecessary," she replied. Ethan did not respond immediately. That statement removed function dependency as a required variable in his internal framework. The wolf exhaled slowly, lowering its head against Lily's knee, maintaining complete stability without external reinforcement. Ethan observed the motion carefully, focusing not on outcome but on structural causation absence. There was no observable control mechanism. No reinforcement cycle. No corrective feedback structure. Yet equilibrium persisted without interruption across all observed states. Lily shifted slightly, and the wolf mirrored the movement instantly, maintaining perfect synchronization without hesitation or delay. Ethan adjusted his stance, entering deeper into full observational integration range. Still, no system response occurred. No recalibration. No resistance. Only continuity. "If there is no governing structure," Ethan said quietly, "then stability must exist independently of definition." Lily responded after a brief pause. "It already does," she said simply. Ethan's gaze tightened slightly, not in resistance but in internal recalibration of foundational assumptions. That response eliminated definition as a prerequisite condition. If stability existed independently of definition, then his entire system architecture was not incomplete. It was misapplied. The wolf remained still, fully aligned with Lily's presence, exhibiting no deviation or uncertainty across repeated observation cycles. Ethan studied the pattern again, removing all prior assumptions regarding system dependency, behavioral regulation, and structural enforcement. What remained was a continuous equilibrium state that required no input, no correction, and no validation. He took one final step forward, fully integrated into the interaction field, and still nothing changed. The system did not acknowledge him as a required variable. No instability occurred. No correction followed. Only persistence of structure without governance or interpretation layer. Ethan finally spoke, voice lower than before. "Then stability is not maintained," he said. Lily looked toward him briefly, her expression unchanged. "It was never maintained," she said. Ethan's internal framework attempted one final reconciliation, but no valid model could be produced from the observed data. Every foundational assumption regarding control, regulation, and system dependency collapsed into a single unresolved condition, stability existing without requirement for control, definition, or enforcement. The cottage remained unchanged. The wolf remained calm. Lily remained steady. And Ethan Caldwell, standing within a system that functioned perfectly without his architecture, recognized that what he had spent his entire life building was not the source of order. It was only an interpretation imposed on something that had always existed without him. The system did not initiate recalibration because recalibration required a governing structure, and Ethan Caldwell had already reached the final operational conclusion that no governing structure existed within the cottage field he was observing. He remained fully within the interaction range, yet his presence no longer functioned as a meaningful variable within any active system model. Inside the cottage perimeter, Lily Harper and the Black Wolf continued their uninterrupted equilibrium state, showing no deviation, no instability, and no measurable change across all observed cycles. Ethan did not initiate any further analytical queries. Every classification framework he had previously relied upon had already failed to produce a valid model for what he was observing. Lily remained near the cottage threshold, her posture unchanged, while the wolf maintained precise alignment with her position, responding only to her movement without delay, correction, or variance. Ethan narrowed his gaze slightly, focusing not on behavior but on the absence of any definable structural control. There was no command input. No feedback regulation loop. No hierarchical enforcement layer. Yet the behavioral state remained fully stable across all observed time intervals without deviation. Ethan took a slow step forward, entering full proximity range once again. The system did not respond. No recalibration signals activated. No instability markers appeared. No structural resistance occurred. The absence of response had become the defining operational baseline rather than an anomaly condition. Lily finally turned her attention fully toward him, her expression calm and unchanged, carrying no indication of resistance or recognition of disruption. "You are still trying to measure it using systems that assume control is required," she said quietly. Ethan paused briefly before responding. "Without structured control parameters, predictive modeling and replication become invalid," he said. Lily shook her head faintly. "Then maybe what you call invalid is just unnecessary complexity," she replied. Ethan did not respond immediately. That statement removed complexity as a required condition within his internal framework. The wolf exhaled slowly, lowering its head against Lily's knee, maintaining complete equilibrium without external reinforcement or observable input. Ethan observed carefully, focusing on causation absence rather than behavioral outcome. There was no observable control mechanism. No reinforcement cycle. No corrective feedback structure. Yet equilibrium persisted without interruption across all observed states and intervals. Lily shifted slightly, and the wolf mirrored the movement instantly, maintaining perfect synchronization without hesitation or delay. Ethan adjusted his stance, entering fully into the interaction field for the final time. Still, no system response occurred. No recalibration. No resistance. Only continuity without governance. "If there is no governing structure," Ethan said quietly, "then stability is not something produced." Lily looked at him briefly, her voice steady. "It is something that exists when nothing is trying to interrupt it," she said. Ethan's gaze tightened slightly, not in resistance, but in the final collapse of all remaining structural assumptions. That response eliminated production as a necessary variable. If stability was not produced, then it was not dependent on design, input, or regulation. The wolf remained still, fully aligned with Lily's presence, exhibiting no deviation or uncertainty across all observed cycles. Ethan studied the pattern one final time, removing every remaining assumption regarding control, dependency, enforcement, and system architecture. What remained was a continuous equilibrium state that required no origin, no maintenance, and no interpretation layer. He stood within full integration range, and still nothing changed. The system did not recognize him as required. No instability occurred. No correction followed. Only persistence of structure without governance, definition, or observer dependency. Ethan finally spoke, voice lower than all previous observations. "Then everything I built was not control," he said. Lily's expression remained unchanged. "It was only noise around something that never needed you," she replied. Ethan did not respond. The internal framework that had defined his entire understanding of systems, control, and stability reached its final collapse point without resistance or recovery. No replacement model formed. No corrective structure emerged. Only absence of necessity. The cottage remained unchanged. The wolf remained calm. Lily remained steady. And Ethan Caldwell, standing within a system that had functioned completely without him from the beginning, finally understood that stability was never something he created, measured, or controlled. It was something that had always existed where control was never required at all.